All right, it's time to add a little bit of a Christmas or past Christmas winter cheers into our art. And I wanted to actually pick something that's kind of a nature scene with a bit of perspective. Like this one here. This one's pretty good. And the reason for that is that I want to show adding a snowstorm or some snowfall in the background different from the one in the foreground. Right now, even though there is a person walking here and it's just a still image, even though we will be animating the snowfall, maybe we need to get rid of that person or do some other magic to, keep an animation without wondering, well, why is that person standing still here? That's a different topic. And in fact, we do have an option for, removing items that maybe they're blemishes or maybe they're little scratches or just details we don't want to see in the picture at that point. So let's go. Here I am on pexels.com. Thank you, Stariant, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Thank you for donating this picture for the greater common good. Oh, there's a couple of others here, but these are on iStock, so these are not royalty free. But something like this is definitely very usable for some of this exercise that I'm getting into, especially if you have already a little bit of a foggy look towards the end, towards the horizon. And this one here, look at that, with some snow already around here, or frost anyway. So anyway, let's stick with this one. Let's download. What do we do here? It's free to use. Excellent. Thank you. Free download. There you go. Is there a choice? Yeah, let's take the original. We might trim it down a little bit or crop, maybe have only half of the picture there for our exercise. Let's do that. And not going to do that today, but every once in a while I certainly do recommend. Let's open this in Irfan View. And there it is. So I'm going to simply copy, Control C, and then run Howler. Oh, and as you can see, I did something similar here with a different picture. This one I will not use in today's exercise, but it is certainly a very typical scenario where you might have maybe clear skies in the back or even something, maybe some storm clouds, darker, and then a first layer of trees or something that you can identify where some of the snowflakes should not appear, right? You want the snowstorm to be in the background, a blizzard blasting through behind it. And that's really something you can quite easily do if you think about masking it, right? If you do a selection by the brightness, like for example, if you do a select by clear, there it is, the lights, it will select the stuff up here. Now it's not fully selected because it had a little bit of a grayish tone, but it's certainly better than here, and you can adjust the brightness here, adjust selection. For example, make it more contrasty or less, and essentially get a fairly decent selection mask here to say, okay, I'm going to make sure that the snowflakes do not appear in front of the trees, only in the back. And then blast that blizzard from right to left or left to right. Then you may have a few extras that are going to show up in the front. And these are going to be some wild flurries, bigger snowflakes, a little bit more turbulent, maybe more wet snow falling down. So there's a different impression we want to gain from the nearby snowflakes and versus the faraway snowflakes. But anyway, so here we're going to paste the image we grabbed from Pexels. And what we shall do at that point is replace the existing image, and then we'll store this just so we have that. Maybe we don't need this one anymore. And at that point, let's see, maybe we focus on just the left half. What do you think here? Right half. Yeah, let's focus on, let's do a rectangular selection and do something like this. Maybe Control to move it around, Control Shift with the mouse to move it around. And then that way we don't have the person in there to worry about. Maybe a little bit here about this. Okay, let's do this. And crop to that selection. And crop to selection, there it is. And by the way, if you want it a little bit smaller or bigger, let's say smaller, you can do a shift and right click to remove from the selection, or shift and with the left button drag, add to that selection, maybe cut off a little bit here at the top, a little bit here at the bottom, so we have a nice rectangular prediction of what we will be selecting. There you go, something like that. All right, and image, crop to selection, there it is. All right, so that's our image we're going to be working with. And at this point, let's see what the dimensions are. Since we only did this manually, it may not have a very clean dimension, right? It may have some odd numbers even in the width or the height, or both. So let's go image info. And yeah, sure enough, that's 1267 if my eyes don't lie to me. And then here 53 on the height. That's no good. We don't want to have odd numbers, because most of the video, if you turn this into a video, most of the animation or video systems don't work with odd numbers for the width or the height or both. There have to be at least multiples of 2, preferably multiples of 4, 8, or 16. So make sure you go to resample that, and let's say if we want it 1280, actually keep the aspect ratio. Let me do that again. So image, resample, and make sure you lock the aspect ratio, and then 1280 will give us an even number here too. That's awesome, but maybe we want it a little bit smaller. Let's say we want actually 1280 on the height, 1280, and we give an 1116. We might even then at that point say, you know what, let's go down, up a little bit or down a little bit, like break the aspect ratio lock and say maybe 1112. I don't know, whatever. If you have a number that's nearby that you prefer, you could also crop it again to remove the size, but or reduce the size, but that's another way to do it. And often it's good enough. If it's off by a few pixels, you may not notice any sort of distortion. And then here we have the whole thing selected. You see the marching ants still on it. I'm going to clear that, and I'm going to store that image. So I'm going to work with this, and I'm going to turn this into an animation. So let's turn this into create. And let's say we want 123 frames, or maybe even more, double that, 234. And it does fit there, 952. You just want to make sure it's not going over 2 gigabytes, right? 2000 megabytes, order of magnitude. So let's do that. So we now have an animation, and what we're going to do is let it snow. So there is a timeline here. And in the timeline, it's basically a collection of filters, similar to what you see here in the filter. But on top of the fact that you can play the filter effect on a variety of, on all these frames, you can also keyframe many of the parameters that come along with the selected filter. So if we go all the way down to the bottom, there's a snowfall filter, right? And if we just play it as is, let's see what happens. Make sure you have the save undo checked so you can easily undo. Let's play it, or apply that, and then play it here. Let me move this a little bit with Control Shift to the right side, zoom in a little bit. You see there are a couple of dots. These are the snowflakes. They are not super bright right now. The brightness by default is kind of a darkish 100. If you wanted them white, you make them brighter. But let's see first what we got from this. And there it is. So it's mostly vertical direction and not super exciting. Wet snow, perhaps, right? If you had it a little bit faster, it might be convincing. So let's first undo. And this time, what we'll do is it'll make it brighter, but also bigger. So change the size and apply. Not yet. What we want is the velocity to be different. So there's a velocity to the down vertical, and there's the wind speed left or right, right? So you can have them fall very slowly. If you make the velocity almost 0, I think the minimum is 1. There you go. You'll see that if you apply that, it's going to be very slow moving. Right, so undo. You can see in the replay during the undo. So that was very slow moving snow. Now, if you want, you can also have a wind speed to the left or to the right. And if you do the strong wind to the left, the snowflakes will move to the left, and they will move almost horizontally because we have very little velocity to the downside. Whereas if you gave it a lot of velocity to the downside, it would be much more vertical again. So you can play with that a little bit. Let's go and apply that. Now you can see the snowflakes are moving really strong to the left. Now there's something else. They're still a little bit too slow, right? So we will want to to change something else with that as well. But certainly, let's undo that. And one thing I would do, by the way, at this time, since we're going to use this again and again and experiment to learn from mistakes, what we want to do is capture the current, store the current. What is it? Store animation. And don't waste any memory for that. Put it on disk. It's fast enough if you have an SSD drive. See, that entire animation got saved in like less than a second. And so you can easily just click that to reload the animation if you need to, like if you mess something up. All right, so what we'll do, let me move this out a little bit. What we'll do is we'll apply a bigger amount of snowfall now, make it to 1,000, that's the maximum, and the velocity is still very small, maybe a little bit higher than 1, maybe 2 for the vertical down, and the wind speed either very strong to the right or to the left, but not at the maximum. We want to have some margin so we can still move a little bit faster for the snowflakes that are closer, right? So they appear closer also simply by virtue of moving faster. So what you want to do is give it a little bit. Let's say we want the wind to come in from the left and move to the right. So the blizzard, the snowflakes should move to the right, and we'll give it about halfway for the speed, and we'll give it little turbulence, because the ones that are highly turbulent will be the ones up close. And then there's a smaller size needed for the ones that are far away, maybe 2 or 3. Try a few different sizes, right? And then do this again and again if you want to accumulate it. And then the brightness, that's another one too. You might want to make it not fully bright white unless they're close. If they're farther away, try to blend them into about the same color or brightness as the background sky is, right? Find the luminosity, if you will, or just estimate it roughly. And then that way you have some margin for that as well. So I'm going to do that. And now the snowflakes should be moving to the right, but they're very small. You can barely see them. Right, let me zoom in a little bit. There they are. There's a couple of grayish dots, and let's play it. Yep, it's moving to the right. But they're moving in front of the trees. And this is supposed to be the blizzard, the bulk of the storm in the background. So one thing we need to do at this point is to protect the trees so they don't get to show the snowflakes. We need to have a mask, a selection mask that selects not the trees, but everything but the trees. And up to a certain distance. Then behind it, back here on the right side, we will want the snowflakes to appear even in front of the trees. So we're going to be looking for something that identifies how close it is, or how, the trees, how close they are. The poles also, this probably a street sign is attached to it, or maybe a lamp. And then there may be some trees or some houses and other items that also are too close, and you don't want that first batch of snowflakes to be there, to be showing. So one thing I would do is look at the picture here and perhaps gradually, manually select, right? You can do the Lasso Tool and select stuff that's really up close. Let's say up here, the street and the walk, everything here should be protected. Right, and then you can also use the Shift key to select more. But it's going to take a little time, right, if you want to select all of that, and it's going to be not very accurate. Sometimes you have easy geometry to select that way. Keep that in mind. This tree maybe we also don't want to draw in front, so maybe we go all the way to here, right, and then here as well. So all of this, at this distance, the tree still also should not be showing the snowflakes. Now, of course, we are doing the selection on the tree, and then we'll invert it. Right? Now, this is not a very good one, so I'm going to do actually a different mechanism. We will want the dark trees to be selected and then invert it. Right? That's probably a better approach to make that selection. So I'm going to go with the select by shadows. And you see that selected pretty much what we want. And it's that happens to look like that in this picture, because indeed the farther away it is, the brighter it fades into the fog. So that's to our advantage. That's perfect. Sometimes you have to look at it and say, wait, that is dark, but it's actually close, or that is dark, but it's actually far away. So you decide, should it be selected or not? And then sometimes you have a little glossiness or some little dots. Like here I already had some snowflakes. They get to be selected or not selected, so you see the marching ants there. Let's start with something that doesn't have any snowflakes yet and do that selection again. select by shadows. There you go. So now you have a cleaner tree, but still there may be parts on the original picture that end up not being selected. So there's a couple of ways to fix that, right? You use the Lasso Tool again with the Shift key to select some more. Right click if you want to deselect. Not click, but left drag to select. And you can gradually select items that are showing marching ants and to say, no, these should still be selected the same way as the rest of the tree. Here too, if you see some areas that are starting to fade and the selection did not grab them, you can make it so. More importantly, you can see my selection here is absolute on the inside of the tree, but only partial. So you may need to do that adjustment, right? Selection, adjust the selection so you have a little bit more of contrast there. You see how the tree is showing some of the bark texture because some of it is lighter and some of it is darker, and it was just on the threshold of where the automatic selection by the shadows decided maybe we shouldn't select it all at 100%. So you can adjust some of that. Play with the contrast, make it high contrast. Play with the gamma also, so there are fewer choices. And with that, you should pretty easily be able to select, let's see, gamma. Let me reset that, set the contrast. And then once you have, let's say you have this selection here, right? That's pretty good. It's maybe not fully selected, a little bit deselected. When you invert it, you may still have a little bit of that. So you may need to turn this into a grayscale and then expand the dynamic range. There's a couple of steps that you can use to do that, right? So I think even actually here, that expand dynamic range on the selection itself, right? And that way you probably have full selection in here, even though it shows the texture because the color map is still there. The pixels behind it, you still see them, but the selection is now probably fully selected in here. And you can still use the selection fader tool, excuse me, not the selection fader tool, but the what was it? Oh, the adjust selection here to do even more, so even more contrast. So you can see, yeah, this is fully white selected here and black deselected. So you do that. Now there is this part though. In the front we only have a few areas selected, and we really should have the entire walkway and street selected there too. So that's where you need to use that fader, the selection fader. It's a multiply mode, so the selection fader will basically allow you to work from what you already have and add to it. It's an additive mode, I guess, in this sense. But what you want to do is perhaps store this selection. Let's store this selection so we have a snapshot of it. And that way you can also, if you mess it up, you can easily restore it and try again. Right, so for example, you see some areas here that should probably be the same black as over here. Now that you can actually paint directly in here. There's a little paint brush here. And so you could go here with the right button to eradicate this selection. Now it doesn't eradicate it in the actual deployed selection you see here on the left. That's not going there directly. It's just a snapshot. And if you say, okay, that's it, or there are some other areas that you want to modify, once you're done, let's say here, if you want to make all this selected, and maybe make the brush a little bit bigger so you get to that faster. You can also resize the snapshot up to a certain level. You can do this. And then you say, well, all this walkway should also be selected. There's no reason why this shouldn't be selected. It's at the same distance. We should have snowflakes appear here or blocked from appearing the same way as the trees. All the way to this tree in the back here. If anything on this tree is not showing, okay, that's not good. Let's do an undo. There's only one level of undo here. Be careful with that. So when you do that, if this tree is selected, anything at this distance in this perspective view should also be selected. So you can easily go like this. But at some point you want to fade it out. Right? So let's say you want to go all the way to about here with your selection. So the tree is still fully selected, and the street, everything with it is selected, completely selected, up to that distance roughly in this perspective view. Now, is this really realistic that it would be completely suddenly not select and not show the snowflakes? Or if we invert it, it would show the snowflakes here and suddenly it wouldn't? No, that's something we need to fade. So first of all, we'll replace the alpha. So now we have that selection here. And in fact, we can also invert it because we really want to do it this way. Replace it. So we now have, let me change the size of this copy here. So we now have the parts that will be blocked from showing the snowflakes here. But there are some parts in the back that should show it. However, we want to have a gradual transition to that. Right, at least for this part here and this part here and so on. So there's sort of a combination we need to do between the trees that should be always blocked from showing snowflakes, at least the ones that are far away. And there are some other parts here that gradually, with the distance, should be combined. So that's something that you can do with that selection fader. If you look here, you have a selection fader tool. You can also right-click on the tool here with the various gradients and other things, and there is a selection fader tool, same thing. So with that, if you go with the existing one here, you could say, well, it's fully selected above or at this far distance, and then it's gradually fading up to here. So you could go like this. It's not perfect, and I would say perhaps instead of having, well, you could use it this way, right? Write that. That's one way to do it. So you now have a fading, a transition. Let me undo this 2 times and go maybe from, let's see, that's a bigger distance, something like this, a little bit at an angle. You can do this at an angle to reflect the fact that you're not looking exactly in the direction of that perspective shot, because we cropped off the left half. We're kind of looking a little bit in a different angle direction. But that's sort of what you can do if you want to work with that. To add a little bit of a distance cue in terms of how strong that intensity of the fading mechanism should be. This part here I messed up, sorry, don't do that. But you can certainly clean that up too. There's also, by the way, brushes. You can paint on the alpha directly here, right? So if you look at the adjustable, oh, excuse me, not the adjustable gradients. If you look at the brush tool, there are some paint on alpha, and oh, probably at the bottom or near the bottom here somewhere. I forget where it is. There, paint on alpha, not the bottom at all. Anyway, there's some soft brushes, and you can paint over that. Not what I would recommend in this case, but you can certainly experiment with that as well. All right, so, well, actually, let's see if we can maybe fix this a little bit here. So we have the right button, I suppose. Yep, with the right button. It's a little bit too big a brush. Let's change the size to smaller, opacity a little bit less imposing, and did we just reset things? Oh yeah, things got reset. That's no good. All right, so that's why we need a saved copy. Let me undo, and of course it lost some of that, so I need to replace this one, and maybe before I do the gradient, go fix this. So here is how I can unpaint the alpha that's in there. Never mind the little rectangular appearance or artifact while I'm drawing. What you want to do is kind of focus on that black thing, the black dab that I'm painting with as I'm going down. So that way you have a selection that's a little bit better. Actually, this also should be all selected. Same thing. Right? This was basically a little smudge that I didn't need. And right-click to deselect, and I think we're a little bit better here with this. And so what we'll do now is go back to that gradient that we had done, selection fader. From here, selection fader tool, and so far away we want it selected, and then as we get closer we want to deselect it. So that'll be maybe something like this. Right. But again, you don't have to do this on a single selection image. If you have 2 different cues, one is the distance, the other one is the trees, no matter where up or down they are, you can do this on 2 different things and then add them together. See how you have on the stored copy, you have an add? You can combine the 2 together. Right? So let's actually do that. Let's store, undo this and store this one. So we have, actually store it right here. This is we don't need this old one anymore. So let's go get the alpha. And so we have this alpha image. Now I'm going to clear the alpha on here. So this one here has no selection, and I'm going to put a different alpha channel here, a progression only based on the distance, not on the trees. right? Foreground, picture, whatever, but just the distance, how far it is, based on my understanding of what I'm looking at in this perspective view. So I can do a selection fader like this, where it's going, or maybe a little bit closer. Undo that and say maybe from here to here, a little bit tighter, right? But basically have a transition where based on the distance, we want it to fade. Let's store this one. Store the selection. So now we have two selections. We have one selection here like this, and we have another selection here like this. This one actually is inverted relative to that, or maybe this one is. Let's go invert it. There you go. So we have this one here is based on the trees. In fact, I'm going to invert both. Let's do this and this. So that perhaps brings it better together. Now I can see I want to add them together. I want to combine this one that shows the nearby elements, some of the trees and some of the foreground trees and the foreground here. I want to add this selection mask with this selection mask. In fact, this one is perhaps not quite perfect yet. It comes up too close down here. This will collide with this. I want it even farther. So let's go and do that again. I'm going to clear the selection and I'm still on that selection mask, the fader. So I'm going to go from about here to here. There. All right, let's get this selection, get the alpha dead. So that's a good selection mask to fade away in the distance. And this is a good selection mask to just have the foreground fully selected. So now I'm going to combine the two. Right, so I have this one here. I can always replace it if I didn't. So I have this one here, and then I add this one. Right, so now I have this combination of both. Right. The black pixels, when I add them, they don't modify anything, so this gradient here is still the same. But up here, the trees were fully white, and the branches too, and so that adds a nice selection for the foreground trees, whereas the background is fading and not affected by these foreground trees. So perfect, that's my selection mask. I'm going to store this one. And so here we have a combined selection mask. I don't need these anymore. I might want to suggest perhaps keep them for a while, keep them minimized, just in case you do something different and you say, oh, I needed that too. For example, if you put a bicycle here, or a car, or a person, or a dog, you want that one, or maybe back here, you want them also selectable or masked in some way. So it's always good to have a reference to go back to and not have to redo everything from scratch. At any rate, we now have that selection mask, and we can apply this snowfall. Actually, right now, it would be the foreground that's selected. We need to invert it. So invert and replace. So now we have the background, right? So now that's where we're going to have the blizzard with 1,000 snowflakes, low velocity, mostly blowing to the right side, far away in the distance. And the brightness, we'll have to experiment with it. Barely any turbulence. Size is small. Let's rip it. So this is now rendering only through the mask up here. And you can do that a few times. Once you've done this a few times, you'll trust that you know where it's going. You can always verify that it's showing where you want. And if you don't want these marching ants to disturb, you can certainly hide the marching ants here where it says show marching ants. Uncheck that. I like to use the tinting, the purple tinting. That's something you see here from the overlay. If you disable the overlay, it's really difficult to see because you don't have the marching ants and you don't have the overlay coloring. It's difficult to see where your selection is. You have to trust that you know what you're doing there, but it's still possible to work that way, and it might get you there faster. I like the overlay mode, and what you do, and then at that point, is you simply play back that animation I just rendered 2 times. And you see a little bit of snowflake activity here. Some of it in front of the tree. Here, let me go minimize that. You see some of it in front of the branches, but none of it in front of the new branches up here. The big branches are completely void of snowflakes. Right? In the back there, though, in the sky, you can tell there is some snowstorm activity. So that's perfect. The selection mask is doing what we want it to do. We see back here there's some snowflakes. Right? But there you go. And every once in a while, if you say, yep, that's pretty neat, let's go and store this. Store this animation again to disk. It will be a new stored copy. You can keep the old one if you feel you might still need to get back to it. Simply go, let's see, if we, oops, what did I do here? I probably accidentally had, you know what, if you still have the selection fader on like I just did, maybe you want to switch back to a regular brush or something else. like a rectangle selection tool, something so you don't accidentally mess with this mask. I think I may have the mask gone, so let me restore it. Where is it? It's probably this one here now, but that's the thing where it's not really clear. Yep, it's this one here. So let me replace that mask. Maybe I'll just keep it down here so it's handy in case I need to do that again. And so this one you can, by the way, also the timeline you can also adjust. And that's important if you want to have finer resolution and detail, right? Some granularity on that timeline. Especially if you start changing some parameters and keyframing them. Like you might do a whiplash on the snowfall, like suddenly blows to the left and then back to the right. For example, if you do special effects and let's say there is a meteor impact nearby or a big explosion and there's a shockwave that's doing a whiplash on the air. Of course, the trees should do the same, but at least the air, the snowflakes could do that. And then you add some sound effects and whatnot. But anyway, let's go back. Let's just render a few more of this. And perhaps even some darker ones, but even smaller. Let's say size is 2. Let's go down to 1. I don't think you can go smaller. Yeah, it has to be at least 1, but let's make him a little bit darker. Apply that. And then you'll see them here. And the nice thing now is that it's a mix. Some snowflakes are small and dark. Some snowflakes are a little bit lighter and brighter. And then, you keep doing this, rendering it a few times, you get 1,000 at a time. And if you want some brighter ones, you add that. If you want some bigger ones, you do one, maybe at 2 or 3. Something like that. That's 2. Hold on, let's make 3. And perhaps add a little bit of turbulence gradually here. Apply that. And then one thing that also helps to give it a bit more of a realistic feel is to not make them move at exactly the same speed, right? The smaller they are, we want to make it look like they're farther away. So make them move, let them move a little bit slower, right? Give them a little bit less on the wind speed when you reduce the size, and maybe make them dark and apply that. So by reducing the wind speed, they move slower. By increasing the wind speed, they move faster, and it may give us the impression that they are closer. But of course, it all depends on what you're trying to convey here. If you want to say there is a blizzard far away, you need to perhaps move it a little bit faster far away. But it's a tug of war between the perspective effect. When it's farther away, it should move slower. So do a little bit of that, and then also eventually make them bigger. So maybe up to 4. Still, everything should have that in the background. The mask is still there to prevent it in the foreground. The wind speed could now pick up a little bit. The velocity a tiny little bit too. Apply that. Now be careful. Now you're starting to add some big ones, and it's going to fill up really quickly. Right, so this is good for the far distant storm. Now what do we do for the stuff in the foreground? Right, we have some snowflakes already showing nearby here, but not in front of the tree. This tree, yes. So we can see there's a little bit of a perspective situation here, and we did successfully mask and prevent snowflakes from appearing in front of the nearest tree. The second nearest, there are some making it through, and then up here, nothing yet. So that's where we need to say, okay, now let's do an additional mask. And you could do this in 2 or 3 different stages, right? You can do a mask for very far away. You can mask something to include this tree here on the right side, tree number 2, but tree number 1 would still be protected. And then when you're done, you apply it to everything. Right, so let's do this just one more time. Let's do a selection that's a little bit different, and we will have let's see, what was it? This tree will still be protected, but this one here should be enabled. And a fairly cheap way to do that is you simply use the lasso. I mean, we could do this the same way we did before, but you could use the lasso tool here. And excuse me, not selected, but actually that's it exactly. Select this tree, something like this, all the way to here. Then of course all the foreground should also be selected, not just the tree, but anything at the same distance in this perspective view. And maybe we want this post also, right? This post is a little bit farther than the tree, the first tree, so we could actually have this post also selected. And so we can go like this. You can zoom in to make it a little bit more precise, right? Something like this. Control Shift will let you move around with the left button, and Control Shift with the right button will let you zoom in. Then you can shift and drag with the left button, so you have the lasso tool adding to your selection, and something like this, maybe a little bit more here. And let's see, let's not be too picky, this is just a demo, but you get the idea of how you can be quite constructive here when you're constructing, pun intended, when you're constructing your selection mask. You can be quite constructive. And so this is a very sudden selection or deselection transition. You will want to, again, perhaps do something about a transition with the selection fader. But here is certainly a rough way to do it. And add this and this. There you go. Maybe that was a little bit too much. Let's use the right button to deselect again. Let's zoom in here to select this a little bit more precisely. And by the way, sometimes you need a fluffy edge here. You need that selection to not be too sudden or too strictly fully selected versus deselected, right? Like if you're looking through paper that's like parchment, semi-transparent, you may want to do a little bit better in terms of what is being selected and what is not. Here, let's not forget this pole in the back. The tree is not selected, but the pole is fully selected now. There you go. Here, there's a little bit of orange. See, that's the nice thing about this purple glow. It shows you also where do you have something that's partly selected. Because the marching ants, they only show you the 50%, the transition zone. See here? You have some purplish showing. If you didn't do this, a selection overlay, you couldn't tell. Right? So the selection mask, the marching ants, you'll see something here, but it's not clear exactly what that is. With the overlay mode, you get a better idea that, oh, there's a whole bunch of things that are actually not fully selected, but also not fully deselected. And we really want at this time to have everything fully selected when it's at the distance of that tree here. Right, so this should all be without any marching ants and without any purple side effects. So here, look at that at the top here, that too. Oops, I did a bad one here. Let's undo. So all of these now should be fully selected. These branches from tree number 2 in the background. Shift, don't forget to use the shift key here. There's actually one tree here, this branch that's from the tree number 1 that's going to the back. A part of that might still be deselected, so you could do that. You could do a little fading on the branch itself here. You want to analyze what is it you're actually looking at, and should it be closer and therefore still protected, or should it be farther away and starting to show its snowflakes in that area too. All right, so here we have, I think here we have a pretty good situation where our street sign pole is selected, the tree in the foreground is not. I'm using the left button or the right button to add to the selection or remove from the selection. Here is one that's a little bit strange. I'm going to use the shift key to select like this. No, right click, right key to deselect. There you go. So that's pretty clean. And you can see how you can make your selection mask pretty convincing, pretty good. The dark part here, there's a car in the back, so shift left button to add to the selection, shift right button to remove. And again, if it's a very crisp situation like this, where it's suddenly fully opaque with the tree, that's how you do this. But if you want to have a little bit of a transition, a softness to it, one thing you can do, use the selection here fader, the selection blurriness, right? Gaussian blur or box filter blur. In fact, the show alpha will even give you an idea of what the alpha channel looks like as a grayscale. You don't even need the overlay mode, the purple here, but it helps and it doesn't distract too much. So you can use that to add a little bit of softness to that. But just be aware that you don't usually expect the snowflakes to gradually fade away, so don't make it a big transition. If you have these snowflakes behind it, they will be fully visible before they reach the edge of the tree, and then they will suddenly disappear. Right? There's a tiny little bit of a transition, especially if you zoom out, that will be perfect. Right. Okay, so that's that. We still have a little bit of something to do here at the bottom for the transition. That is for the transition where we are seeing some snowflakes here in the street, but then we shouldn't see them here. But that's not going to be a sudden disappearing of these snowflakes. We want them to gradually fade away, maybe even make them look like they're melting as they're about to touch the ground. That's a very typical use case. So I'm going to actually use the selection fader one more time. Right click on this if you want to use it this way, and simply say, well, here it's fully selected and here it's not selected. All right, so now when we do this, it's going to block this area here too. It's going to enable all this. So you need to first store this. Maybe I'm going to store it into this copy here. No, that's the video. Here it is. Get alpha. So now I have that transition, and I want to do a transition where here, based on the distance, it's fully selected in this level, and then coming down, it's fully deselected. So that's the selection fader. Right, so selection fader like this does a fade transition, and this part here is actually still good. But if it were to disappear in your selection fader tool, you can certainly do something about it by combining it again, adding the two together. I think this will be fine this way, and then we'll simply grab it, get the alpha, and invert it. So now we have the foreground, invert it again. Now we have the background behind this front tree. Right? Anything at that distance should receive the next round of snowflakes. Let's go do that. Apply it. And we hopefully didn't mess with these parameters, so that should still be good. Let's see. We now have probably a fair amount of snowfall happening there. Still nothing showing in front of the tree in front, but we do have the second tree now starting to show some snowflakes. Right, so you can see how we gradually move from the far distance to the front by imagining a plane or a selection mask that controls the availability to be seen, right? The ability for these snowflakes to be actually rendered over this tree or over that tree, and even the pole here. Whereas the ones in the front, nothing. Sorry, not yet. So let's say we do one more, even more turbulence now. And the size, we'll keep them a little bit higher, but we will make it smaller. I'd say about half the number on the snowfall amount. Brightness, they're coming closer. They're not fully bright yet. Wind speed, a little bit faster. We still want a little bit margin here. And velocity, let's leave it alone. It will still have mostly a horizontal movement. Let's go. And you can see this goes faster because there are fewer snowflakes to render as we decrease their quantity. So now we have a nice amount of very small snowflakes in the upper left corner at the far distance, but we also have more and more of the bigger ones. And perhaps we do one more, like half that number, and bigger size, and a little bit brighter, and more turbulent. And what else? Keep the speed here, but maybe a little bit more now on the vertical movement, and apply. All right, let's go and hide. Oh no, just play it to see what we are dealing with right now. Okay, so we're starting to get some big snowflakes. They're coming down a little bit more vertical. You can see that here, right? You notice that when you zoom in, the ones that are small and go faster to the side versus the ones that are coming down, the big ones, they're moving more down. And that's exactly what we need to give it some extra visual cues. One thing we'll do finally is some very few, maybe just 10 or 20. Don't do too many of those, but they'll be really bright, they'll be really big, something like that, and high turbulence. And the wind speed, perhaps even more, but also a little bit more on the vertical. And so with that, let's go render that. Before we do that, by the way, let's do another, every once in a while, save often, right? Do another save copy to disk so we can go back in time if we need to. Here we go, render that. So there's only a few big ones. These are the ones up close. Why are they not up close? Because we still have the mask. Right, so that's no good. We need them really in front of this front number one tree too. So let's go undo and clear the mask. Selection, deselect. Now everything gets those snowflakes. Right, so now we can apply it, and we know it's going to go in front of the tree number one as well. And there it is. So now we have snowflakes very far, small ones. We have medium-sized in the middle center area between tree number 1 and tree number 2. And we have a couple of really big ones. Not all of them the same size, right? There's a little bit of randomness to that as well. And if you really want to add to that, you can certainly add even a larger quantity of small ones again, something like this, even to the foreground. You could maybe reduce the velocity on those. The small ones will move faster, maybe, right? So let's do that. And let's see what that looks like. I suspect we'll want to do one more. Yeah, let's do one more. Again, very big ones. Let's do the maximum size just to see what that does. Maximum turbulence, maybe less on the speed. Because they're heavy, big snowflakes, they're going to go a little bit more vertical. And only a few of those though, right? So, because you can always render it, apply it a few times. If you say, oh, I got 3 or 4 that I like, but I wanted 20, just apply it a few times. It's more difficult to reduce it. I mean, you need to undo and try again. So here we have a couple of really big ones. Let's see if that's too big. Yeah, for my taste, that's too big. So I'm going to do an undo. And I'm going to do something like this size, and still the turbulence, a little bit less on the vertical velocity, wind speed, a little bit more to the right, brightness, go. And if that's good, then that's it. Otherwise, you could potentially do a little bit more. You know what? I do want a little bit more on the speed sideways, so I'm going to undo. Again, that's why it's important to have the save undo. I mean, it does take a little extra time to save it to disk, but it's so fast that you probably don't really care, and you do care if you didn't do it and you actually want to do an undo, you couldn't. It needs to save these frames before it modifies them if you want to have a chance to undo that last action. So I'm going to go now with the brightness still at the maximum, the size a little bit less, turbulence maximum, wind speed maximum, velocity a little bit less, and the quantity I just want about 10 or so. Apply that. And so now you can see, yeah, that's roughly what I was looking for. And if you want more of those big ones, just do another, apply one more time, but be careful not to overdo it. Yeah, see, that's already a little bit too rough for my taste. But hey, that's where you get to express what you want to see in this. You have some ideas now. So there's only one last thing to do, and that's potentially you want to make this a looping animation. Right? We have, and in fact, we might even want to zoom in, move in a little bit, but then you lose the ability to do a looping. Right? You want a looping, you need to be at the same position and size and view at the beginning of the animation as at the end of the animation. The trick is, though, to not notice if the snowflakes suddenly disappear when you're at the last frame. And, you go here to the last frame, and then you go further, one more. Hold on. There, all the way to the right. Okay, oh, there it is. Sorry, I need to scroll to the right. So if you're at the very last one, how do you make sure you don't notice that if you go one more to the right, next frame, you see how it jumped in here? Right? That's the jump from the last frame to the first frame. Right? But we can get rid of that by saying, well, let's take more than one frame to jump to the next one, the first one. But let's take about 10 or 20. I mean, we have about 200 frames, I think. Yeah, 234. We go from frame 0 to 233. So we can easily dedicate maybe 20 or 30 frames to gradually fade out the existing snowflake animation at the end of it and fade in at the same time the beginning animation at the start of the animation, right? And so that's what we do when we right click here and select make loopable. I think you can see that here from the animation menu too. Before I do that, I'm going to store this once again to disk, not to memory because it takes too much RAM. You don't want to run out of memory doing this. If it's a very short animation, yes, you can store the animation to memory, but it's usually not that much faster. So what you want to do is now make it loopable. I think animation frames. It's a frame level control. You see that all these frames here, when you right click, it's exactly the same menu. Right? This is the frame menu. And so what you see here is make loopable. and the Make Loopable will select the number of frames. You can adjust it if you want more or fewer of them to be selected. Excuse me, let me do that again here. So frames, Make Loopable. The default number here, whatever it is, it'll probably give you about 20%, 15% overlap, maybe a little bit more. You can certainly do more if you want more of the frames used for that transition, so you can less detect where that transition is happening. So when you play it now, as soon as it's done here, the moment you reach the final frames, they actually got already some interpolation from the first series of frames. And as you go to the next one, you don't see a sudden cut or disappearing, right? This one here in front of the tree, this one, this big one, it's still there. It keeps moving, but it's gradually fading away. Now that we are at the beginning of the animation, and you see this right here, right, when you're on the first animation, you can see that some of these are fading away. So you notice if you follow one, like this one is pretty bright right now. Let's follow it. So it will be, where was it? Oh, this one up here. Okay, so look at this one here, and then as it's moving to the right, you will see it fade away. Right, but it's not going to be as subtle. I mean, as sudden. And so you should be able to use this to oh wait, what am I doing here? Did I lose my animation? No, I didn't. Okay, so you have now a loopable, right? Loopable animation or looping, same thing, and you can save this to media and export to media such as WMV, Windows Movie, or to MP4. And I would always give it a bit more on the target bitrate. That depends on the dimensions you want to keep and that sort of things. I'll give it about 12 megapixel, so 12 million something, and a MP4. And there it is. Let's give it a name like Snowstorm. Snow is falling. And we'll probably do this a few times. You might want to have the initial dimensions. Maybe if you're doing half size, put something there to the effect that it is half size. Save this. And then by all means, every time that you do something like this, make sure you test it. Show it in your Windows Media Player or whatever tool you use. Make sure it doesn't show any sort of artifact or inability to play it because you forgot to resample it to an even number of dimensions, the pixels. Let's say now you also want to, now that it's loopable, store it again. You can also save it in DWA, Dog Waffle Animation. It's a memory dump, very fast, but not compressed. You can do to disk, store that again, and the others we don't need anymore. Only do this if you're sure you don't need this anymore, right? One thing I might want to do is make a smaller version, so I'm going to resample this. Something like, let's just take the half size button here. There you go, 640 by 5. You know what? Here's where maybe I want to do a little bit more of a standard dimension. So set the aspect ratio. No, actually, let's just scale this up to 560. I don't know if that's really meaningful, but let's go for 560. We will not notice that much of a distortion with just 3 or 4 pixels on something like a couple of hundreds already. The dimensions, you could make it faster or don't care about the absolute best quality if it takes too long. It usually really won't be that big a deal. These days, these computers are fast enough that you can wait a second or two extra. And the update may not show what's going on, but it is still working and processing. And then once it's done, there you go. Now you can also store that one to disk again. Make sure you check it. And maybe that's the one you'll actually save, or maybe save it, make it one more time smaller and then save it as an animated GIF. Right, so there's a couple of options here. Export GIF animation, export to media, which is WMV and MP4. And there's also a save at AVI. Make sure you're smart about what codec you use. And that's it for now. So hope this was useful and gives you some ideas of how you can further enhance your Christmas pictures or winter landscape by adding some looping animation. and let it snow.